This is episode number 120, featuring the amazing, and I do mean amazing, Christine Lashley.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Well, thank you, announcer Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir podcast. Yep, my name's Eric, and I'm glad to be here with you today, and I am really getting jazzed. About a week to go. If you're listening to this as soon as it's released, about a week to go until the big PleinAir convention in San Francisco. If you're listening to this after it, I'm sure we had a great time. Anyway, it's hard to believe. Time flies. It's going to be a grand week painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Wow, it doesn't get better than that. I've painted the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's one of the great memories of my life. I love iconic places to paint, and there's nothing quite like painting that spot. We're not really painting cityscapes, but you could turn around the other direction and paint the city if you want to. Painting landscapes, and it's going to be a great time. Plus, we've got 88 instructors and a giant expo hall. And I want to remind you, if you're listening to this and you live in the Bay Area and you're not going to the PleinAir convention, well, we would love to have you. We probably can get you in if you decide to get a ticket at the last minute. But the expo hall with all the art materials is open to the public. And the art show with some incredible paintings by the faculty and some of the attendees open to the public. And so just show up. We're going to be at the, the Hilton Hotel downtown Union Square. So you want to come, and we do have a special rate for that hotel if you're interested in coming. All right. Pretty exciting. One of the things we're going to do at the PleinAir convention, I'm going to launch a new product. It's called Value Specs. Do you remember when we were kids? Maybe you don't remember that, but we had the back of the comic books. They had like x-ray specs, and they had the little circles on them, and you could see through things. Well, these help you see through color. And rather than holding up a piece of red plastic, to get your values right, I decided that my arms were getting tired. And so I just put the glasses on and I paint in my values. And then I put them on once in a while to correct my values. And it really helps you see the values. So we're going to have those for the first time at the convention. And they're pretty cool. And they, of course, are like my red socks, a high fashion statement. So we will have some at the convention. Hope you get to try them. Coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. I've got a real unique one. Anyway, let's get right to our interview with Christine Lashley. Christine Lashley, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
Thank you, Eric.
So why are you so happy today?
Well, spring is happening, and I'm getting ready to go paint some cherry blossoms later, and it's just an exciting time of year. I look forward to getting back outside when the weather is nice, so it's a good time.
So how long will the blossoms last? You live in the Washington, D.C. area. How long?
Mm-hmm. They can last up to about 10 days. So I've already seen a few around the neighborhood, and it's a pretty exciting time around here. It used to be, was a little bit like under the radar when I was growing up, and we could go and we could park. And now you have to plan for it, maybe carpool or take the metro because it's very crowded. But
really?
Yeah.
So that
People
would be
have
down on
discovered it.
that would be down on the mall and where all
Right.
the monuments are.
Yep, exactly. But it's spectacular. I mean, it's worth it. I
Really?
pulled the kids out of school one day. I'm like, we're going. This is like our family's, personal retreat. I got them up at like 5 a.m. and we went. It was great. We saw dawn on the mall. It was beautiful.
Well, that's a bucket list of mine to paint the cherry blossoms in Washington. So maybe next year.
next year.
Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. I hope you've got a cot in the garage or something I can sleep on.
I have a guest room. It will be all yours.
All
You can
right.
borrow my PleinAir equipment.
Notice
We're
how
all
I
set.
just invited myself.
Yeah, online or on the podcast and for
That's right.
For
all to hear,
it's
you're going to be
recorded
getting
now.
you're going to get a lot of calls from a lot of people who are
Right.
you don't know me, but I'm one of the 100 million people who was listening, and well, I have to say that getting to know you has been one of the great pleasures of my life. You're really a wonderful, fun person to be around, and
Wow, gosh, Eric, thanks.
yeah,
That's
I'm sure I
very
want
flattering.
something. Yeah. So I'd like to get everybody else to have that same feeling and have them get to know you. So that's what this podcast is all about.
Well, I really appreciate it. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I mean, I read the magazines for so long, and I mean, I can remember that feeling of meeting somebody in person that I had read about, or like, wow, it's you, and it's just, and then they're real people, and it's fun to get to know them. Everybody has personal preferences, painting, and it's fun. So I'm glad to be here on the podcast. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what is that? Let's talk about that experience for just a second, not the podcast part, but the idea of reading about somebody and meeting them. You came to the convention, I think, for the first time last year, the PleinAir convention, and you had an opportunity. Yeah. You've met a lot of people because you're out painting and doing a lot of events, but you had an opportunity to meet people there that you probably hadn't met. Do you still have that? That kind of groupie mentality, or did you ever, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's whomever.
I know. It's like, yeah, be careful. Don't say anything stupid. That's what's in my head. Like, just be normal. They don't want a groupie, like you're saying. I guess, there are times when I have that feeling, but talking about attending the PleinAir convention last year, I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. I'd heard a lot of friends talk about it in glowing terms of it's so great and everybody's there. And in fact, through the years of PleinAir painting, I have gotten to know a lot of people at the different events. So at first, yes, it was very much like that. I mean, I remember meeting Stuart White for the first time, and I had followed his work for like forever. And I was just so excited to meet him. That was, I don't know, like 11 years ago or something. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to meet Stuart White. And, then I think I met Jill Carver and Jason Sacron. He was featured in your magazine. And these were people I met at the event after reading about them. And it was, I was so excited, but very quickly they were just down to earth, real people. We talked about art, and that's the thing at the convention, that even if I was meeting somebody for the first time, let's say it was a friend of a friend and I was excited to meet them, maybe they were a big name in the art world, or maybe they were somebody who was attending for the first time and they were a beginner and kind of nervous. I met those people too. And we all were just able to have a really good time talking about art. It's such a good common denominator.
So who is it?
Wipes away that social stratus or status type of deal.
So who is it that you haven't met yet that you're just dying to meet?
Well, Joseph, and the hard name to pronounce is
Zabukvich,
I guess. Yes,
Joseph
right.
Zabukvich.
Yes, okay.
I have a hard time pronouncing it too. You're talking about the Australian watercolor painter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty big deal because, it's taken us, I first invited him for the first PleinAir convention 8 years ago, and it's taken us 8 years to come. He came actually a couple years ago. He was with Thomas Schaller, who was at the convention, and he dropped in to check it out, and he wanted to see if it was worthy, and so he came by and he was so blown away. He said, yeah, absolutely, I want to do this. And so we were able to hook him up for this year. But this is a guy that very rarely comes to the States anymore, very rarely does any workshops in the States. And probably the best watercolor painter in the world. Although there's some pretty incredible ones.
I even tried to get his book, and I think it's out of print now, and it's just he's just wildly popular. And so I can't believe that I'm going to get to meet him and see him paint.
Well, I'll tell you what, on opening night in the cocktail party, you find me and I will walk you up to him and put your hand in his hand, and you guys will become old friends.
Wow. I won't say no to that invitation. Thank you.
Well, who else have you not met that you'd like to meet?
Well, I was just looking at the list of artists. I see you added a few more names.
Yeah, we've got.
We have
88 of them.
It's a great lineup, Eric. I mean, you should be so proud. It's fabulous. Just other artists that come to mind. I followed their work a lot. Mike Hernandez. He does those little gouache studies, and he's an animator, I believe. I don't know if it's Disney or Pixar.
He's incredible. He works for DreamWorks.
DreamWorks.
I think DreamWorks,
mm-hmm.
And so we actually have something we haven't really talked about yet, but this year he's going to do a watercolor thing because he's very popular with his watercolor. But next year he's going to teach how he does painting on an iPad. Oh,
cool! Yeah, I've seen some of those he's posted, and they're
pretty incredible.
They're wonderful. Yeah. I mean, in all the classes that I teach, I mean, some of the people a lot of the people you have on that roster of who's going to be there at the convention, I mean, these are people that in my lectures, I tell students, look, these are contemporary artists working today, follow their work. I mean, we have so much we're so lucky we live in this time when you can just hop on the internet, you can collect the pins from these artists, you can look at their technique, not to copy, but just to be inspired and see. What I'm really trying to get people to do is to develop their critical eye. Here's 10 people working on watercolor. Who's your favorite? Because there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you like? Or maybe let's look at how everybody's using red. And, this artist didn't use any. And look, they're all painting a barn. And so, there's just so many different ways when you compare and contrast. And that's actually another reason I am looking forward to the convention, because you see the people that you've chosen to do demonstrations and exhibit their work are going to be doing just that, talking about what gets them excited and how they got there, what type of journey they've had. It's really good stuff that's happening in the art world now.
I don't mean to belabor the whole convention thing for everybody, but what one of the things we try to do is we try to put people on the stage that people need to see, and sometimes they're not super well known yet, or maybe are well known in smaller circles, but everybody needs to see them. And once in a while I'll get a call from some cranky customer who says, well, I'm not coming because I don't know who that is. And it's like, yeah, but you got to, I mean, there's some of them like Mark D'Alessio, for instance. He lives in Florence. He's not spending a lot of time promoting himself in America, and is probably the best plein air painter on earth. And so that's a really good example for some people who might not know him. And yet, I mean, we're trying to not only bring in the well-known superstar names, and he, by the way, is a well-known superstar name in many, many circles, but there are a lot of people who are going to be like so blown away when they see his paintings and they see him paint. And that's what we're trying to do is, we kind of want people to trust us and say, hey, look, your Plein Air magazine, you must know who's happening and who's hot and people are watching. And so I think that's kind of an interesting approach on that. So getting back to the critical eye, I can't speak for other people, but I can tell you in my own critical eye has changed over and over and over and over again since my early love of painting. And the things that I loved, I cringe to think that I would have had some of these things tattooed on my arm when I was 17, because when I was 17, I liked fantasy paintings of unicorns with wings and, soldiers with swords, on top of them. And so I'm glad I don't have that tattooed on. What did you like when you were like first into this, and how has it all changed?
Well, I mean, first off, it's good to know where you've come from, because that informs where you're going, and it's part of that compare and contrast. That's part of the whole picture, don't you see? You can't just be like, I'm here in the moment and what's done is done. I don't think you 100% reinvent yourself that way. You can be influenced by something. And also what I tell people is, know what you don't like. I mean, that's okay too. A lot of people in the art world are afraid to talk about that, and it's a touchy subject. Even if you look at art and it makes you uncomfortable, are you excited because it challenges you, or do you just not like to look at it? Are you all about beauty? So to answer your question, I am very attracted to what is beautiful. I love luminosity. I love beautiful brush strokes. And of course, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So, I mean, how do you even quantify that? To me, it's a sense of light, a sense of place. It could be a more quiet painting. It doesn't have to be like really high contrast or super bright chroma or, dazzling lights, even though in some of my work, I do feature that kind of dynamic aspect. But I also love, for example, like, let's think, I mean, most people who are listening to the podcast would be familiar with Sargent or Sorolla, and the way that they paint white dresses and things drenched in sunlight. I mean, to me, that's just so exciting. I just can't get enough of that.
Well, but there's also beauty in things that aren't beautiful sometimes. I think you and I were talking one time about, if we took a workshop and we said, okay, follow me, and we go down the back alley of some crummy industrial part of town, and we say, okay, stop. And wherever you stop, you have to figure out how to make something beautiful out of it. And the master at that would be somebody like Joe Paquette or John Cosby, who like to paint these industrial scenes of rusting America, or Charlie Hunter.
Yeah, that's true. Charlie does that. And also, I've been at a number of events with Jason Sacron and John Lasseter, and they are like, they're the alley boys. They're like, Christine, come paint with us. We're going to paint tonight. And I'm like, I don't know, guys. I'm looking for pretty stuff. But we just joke around. I mean, their paintings are fantastic. But and it's not that. Let me just clarify, and I think you bring up a good point, that beauty can be interpreted in different ways as far as your aesthetic choices, which could go back to just shape, colors together, and so forth. For example, one time I was walking with a friend of mine, and it was actually Kathleen Hudson, who's great, and I think she's going to be there at the convention this year.
Yep.
And we were doing a quick draw, and we were scoping out the scene, and I grabbed her arm and I said, "Oh my God, look at that." And she's like, "What?" She's looking around. And I said, "The bridge." We were underneath the bridge. It was in Florida. And she's like, "What are you talking about? You mean the underside of the bridge?" And I said, "Yes, look at the shapes." And she's like, "I don't know, Christine. This is a quick draw." And, she's a very talented painter. I'm sure she could paint that, and nail it 100%. But it just wasn't talking to her. And she went and found, some complicated treetops with a beautiful sense of light and made a wonderful painting. But because I followed her to the end, and I was like, "I don't know, Kathleen, I'm not feeling it." And so I went back to my bridge scene, and she did her, early morning light scene. And there's a perfect example of, two people setting out. And I was struck by one thing, which some people would deem as ugly. And I was really excited about
this happens to me all the time. And I'll get with a buddy and we'll get in the car and we'll go driving around to find a place to paint. And they're like, "Gotta stop there, stop there, stop there," and it's like, really? And so you stop there and
Yeah.
you know, I try to be a nice guy, so I just go ahead and set up and try to paint something. This happened to me the other day. And I'm like so uninspired and just couldn't
Yeah.
see it. And they're like, you know, this is awesome. So you know, that's the curse of having friends that you paint with, I guess. You know,
Right.
and that's nice because, you know, you also see how, you know, I went out with Eric Johnson the other day. He was in town to do a video, and we went out and painted the bluebonnets in Hill Country, and we
Nice.
landed in this one spot looking over these plateaus and these mountains, and you know, it was really on top of a hill looking down. And the spot he picked, I thought, I can't paint there. And I you know, went about a block away and painted my own thing. But then I got up there and I saw what he painted, and it's like, I didn't see that. No idea that was there, you know, and it's just the way he had dealt with the light. So I guess that's a challenge we all
Yeah.
face.
I mean, I love that. I mean, a quick draw, when you have to make a painting in an hour and a half or 2 hours, and, you know, it's for competition and there's so much pressure, but to see what everybody comes up with afterwards, because really usually it's like what's equivalent to a 3-block radius, whether it's in a public park or, you know, on a main street somewhere or something like that. So it's really like a treasure hunt, you know, let's go, let's find our cool thing. And then we all bring back our trophy paintings, you know, I mean, there's times when, I mean, seriously, I lose all objectivity. I'll have a lot of excitement about the subject, and then I do the painting and I'm like, well, that happened. And I almost can't see it anymore. The time is so intense.
Do
So
you ever blow it, you know, when you're doing a quick draw? Do you ever just completely blow it?
Well, every time I think I'm going to blow it, I'm like, yep, you know, this time, like, just, you've had success in the past, Christine. Like, don't be so hard on yourself. You don't have to nail every single one. But I'm honest with you here, Eric. There's something about the quick draw that like pushes me to do something else. I start out with a burst of creativity, then I kind of slump down and think maybe it's not so good. And then I put it in the frame, and usually I think, well, hey, that's not so bad, you know, after the moment passes. I have yet to scrape out a quick draw, but it seems like the crucible time of the quick draw somehow helps me, because there's other times when I have all afternoon to paint and I just can't do it. And it's during a competition, and I'm like, I was supposed to do a painting this afternoon, and like, here's this awful thing that I did. So,
well, there's something to be said.
Quick draw.
Well, there's something to be said for pressure. I mean, I you know, pressure sometimes is a good thing. Have you ever sat up next to an artist? Set up. What is the word?
Yeah.
Set up. Have you ever positioned your easel next to an artist and someone like really intimidating? Somebody is like really rock star good, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, I don't know. I'm not sure I can paint well next to this artist. And
Yeah.
I find that if that happens, sometimes I'll really blow it. And what I finally figured out is the only thing I can do is keep painting and not look at their work, because, you know, you ever wander over, take a break, wander over, look what other people are doing, and you go, oh, you know, I never saw that tree. I'm going to put that tree, and then you screw up your whole painting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the famous factor, you know, especially if you really admire that person's work, I mean, that can be really intimidating. And yes, I've been in that situation. Then it's certainly an experience. But I'll tell you another experience that I always think about. This really affected me deeply.
Deeply.
And it's kind of the flip side of that. So I took my daughters. We have in the DC area, we have a beautiful area that's been preserved along the Potomac River, where there's a lot of natural rock formations, and, you know, there's huge cliffs, and there's a natural trail, and it's very rugged. It looks like you're out west and, you know, big sky country, and it's wonderful. So anyway, it was take your daughter to work day. So I said, come on, kids, let's do some plein air painting. And the kids were like, I don't know, 10 or 8. And so, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to do the river. And we took a picnic and it was all great. And I'm thinking, I'm going to do an okay painting. This is so fun. I'm out with my kids. How awesome is this? Eric, I didn't do a very good painting because I tried to put everything in and it just was no good. And there's my kids. One is actually sitting in there's a geological formation that happens. It's called like a pothole when a boulder swirls around and makes like a round hole in the rock formation. So one of my kids had actually sat inside the rock with her eye barely peeking over the horizon. And I thought, what a bizarre, I tried not to be judgmental, but I'm thinking, how is she going to do a painting from there? She did this awesome painting in watercolor, really bold, with a tiny splash of the water at her eyesight line. And she was up above the water line. I mean, I don't mean this to sound scary, but it was very dramatic, very dramatic. And my other daughter did the raging water that she could see from up high. You see, each one of them had focused on something very specific and had given it their all. And, it's just the energy and their brush strokes. And there I had put in the sky, put in the cliff, put in the water, put in the tree. And the scene had been diluted, but by selecting one thing that really excited them. And I thought, well, here you go. My 8 and 10-year-old completely outpainted their mom in watercolor.
That's awesome.
And
you learned a great
I have them both framed.
Learned a great lesson from that.
Here you go. Never assume, that you're going to do a good painting because somebody who's just starting out might really teach you a lesson.
When I'm in the Adirondacks, I do this thing in June. We get, 60 or 100 painters together. We just paint for a week. And we go to the same spots together. We break it into 2 groups, but we go to the same spots together every day, typically, 2 or 3 different spots a day. And inevitably, I'll walk through and there's, we have this one spot we do every year, which is just unbelievably beautiful. And I'll walk through and kind of take pictures and look at everybody's work. And everybody's got a different take on it. It's like, I never would have seen that. Somebody's focusing close up on, something that you just never would have noticed. And that's what I think is so fun about these events. When you're out at a plein air competition or otherwise, you're painting a lot of the same places, and yet everybody's got a different take on it. And that's what makes it magical.
It's very exciting. It really is. And I feel fortunate to have taught classes for so long because my students continue to teach me as well. Sometimes enthusiasm can really trump a really good skill set. I get people who are kind of apologetic, like, I'm a beginner and, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. And just that mindset can really push people so far because they're open to just taking in nature and having this emotional reaction to it. It's really exciting to see what people can choose.
It's fun to be around beginners because you usually see that moment in time when all of a sudden the light goes off and they're like, oh, this is awesome. This is like so cool. You're in that beginning
euphoria
stage where you're like nervous and you're afraid that other people are going to judge what you're doing. And, you're afraid to make a mistake. You're being overly careful. And then all of a sudden you get it. And it's like, boom. I love that moment. It's one of the most special moments.
Maybe that's what we're exactly talking about. Maybe that's what the quick draw is. And the kids being non-judgmental and the euphoria of a beginner is just letting go of the fear of, it's just being fully in the moment and just, not even thinking about, is the work going to turn out? Because there's the sabotage, right? It's just pure joy of painting and being committed to the moment and really having a go at what you see and trying to capture that.
I think an important lesson for everybody, and I got very lucky very early on. I had a guy who was teaching me. This was not plein air, but I had fallen in love with my painting, and it was bad, and my drawing was off. And he came up and he said, "I'm sorry to do this," but he scraped down my whole painting. And he said, "Now start over, get it right this time." And, I thought he was being kind of a jerk, but, it was probably one of the best things that happened to me. And I think that, if we can communicate to beginners that you don't have to fall in love with it, that, yeah, this is just practice, and get out there and try it, but don't fall in love with it, because you want to get something on there that's pretty decent. How do you feel about that? Is that,
well,
because you teach a lot.
I think you bring up a good point. I think that can actually be for you, it was a pivotal moment, and it was important to you, and you realized that it had a positive outcome. But I have to say, I don't think that's the right move for everybody, that kind of drama and taking over the painting. I'm usually fairly respectful of my students' paintings. I mean, I will repaint a whole, sky or whatever they need help with. But, I mean, in principle, don't get me wrong, I completely agree with you. Don't treat it as precious. Everything is malleable. Maintain your big idea, scrape down and restate. All of those are good main, concepts to go into the field with, especially with plein air painting, and you have a limited time. Scraping down feels like undoing everything, but it can be positive. It took me a long time. It took me almost forever to be comfortable with that. I would really say I only started scraping down my work and restating stuff. I mean, I can remember when it was. I was just a direct painter pretty much my whole life until about 2013. I took a workshop when somebody was talking about redoing work, and it made me very uncomfortable. But it went back to me being a watercolorist, where when I was first starting out, I felt like the beauty was in the fresh mark, and anything that was restated or overstated, just my developing critical eye didn't like it. And, whereas somebody else might not have a problem with it. And there's certainly artists that have done beautiful work with, Homer's a perfect example. He took sandpaper to his watercolor paper, he sanded out, he repainted, he did gouache. And I think his work is beautiful, but when I do it, I don't like it. So just to be clear on that point.
So you're not out there screaming at your students. Get that right.
I don't, it's for those that can take it. I'll be honest with them. I'm like, okay, should I just get right to the point? Cause I'd like to say something about this. And sometimes they're like, please, let's just don't even say anything nice. Let's just talk about critical stuff. I might be there. They know that I have, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes easel side with them per 2-hour class. And so they're like, give me the stuff. I want to know. I want maximum help here. So, I will be heavy hitting with them if they need it and if they want it, and that's going to be beneficial. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, you have to be ready to fully incorporate that into your own style. And for some people, that might not be the right move at that time.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the right move. I wouldn't do it to anybody. I'm too nice of a guy, but it did work for me. But I also watched a lady in our class go insane at that moment, and she broke into tears and left and never came back. So, I don't necessarily suggest that as a great teaching method. I think there are probably other ways to approach that. So you were talking about taking a workshop. I learned about you from Scott Christensen because I was on the phone with him one day recently, and I said, hey, who's the next rock star painter that nobody knows exists yet? And he said, Christine Lashley. Just, off the top of his head. And I guess you had taken a workshop from him, and he was like, blown away by your work. That must
Oh,
feel good.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal teacher and
He is a good
an
teacher.
amazing artist, as everybody knows. Yes, I actually took 2 workshops from him, and I felt like I learned so much at the first one that, it just kind of blew my mind. I worked on all of those ideas presented. One which was, let's undo this area and redo it, and he didn't necessarily scrape it down. I mean, there were different ways that the fabulous thing was it was extremely targeted to each individual student. I mean, you could almost listen and hear as you're working on your own painting, not like hovering at somebody's elbow type of weirdness, but I could hear him helping one student and hear him helping another student, or if we were in the classroom. And it was very to the point, and it was very perceptive to the artist's
And he's very
level.
kind.
Kind is maybe the wrong term, because yes, he's a very nice person, but it was so succinct. In 3 or 4 sentences, and it wasn't like he was short with everybody, but the knowledge was so condensed and so to the point and so spot on with what every painting needed and every artist needed, that I actually learned things. Don't forget, I've been teaching for a while too. So part of the reason I took the first workshop was thinking, well, everybody thinks he's such a great teacher. Let's go find out what that's all about. I'm like, well, let's see what he has to offer. And yeah, I was really impressed.
So what makes a great teacher?
I think what I'm describing, that is a completely tailored advice to every student. Of course, you can have a lecture. You can say, well, we're going to talk about this today. We're going to talk about our value structure. We're going to talk about composition. Whatever your chosen element is, that's a nice thing to, have a overall impression of the day or something like that. But really, it's the one-on-one help and the demo is great too, but it's the one-on-one help when, after you have that part of the information, that part of the lesson, your lecture, your demo from your instructor, then when they come over to help you, you've been, the artist, the student is, whether you're, highly skilled or a beginner, you've been working on these main ideas that were presented through the lecture, through the demo, and you're working on it. And then when the instructor comes over and says something to you, a few bullet points should just click in your head, like, oh, yeah, I see my sky edge and my tree edge could be softened here, because that's what you were talking about in the lecture. Right. And so it's this full circle of, it's a great way to learn. I see, my brain is taking in information, I'm doing it, I'm practicing, and then the reinforcement of the teacher for coming around and saying, here's this touch point and this touch point, and you need to apply this in your art here. And then the interaction with the student, because let's say the student we're talking about edges in this particular example that I'm giving. So if you're talking about edges, let's say the student pushed back and said, but I'm a very hard-edged painter. I really don't use any soft edges. First of all, why would they be taking this workshop? Maybe that's a question. But it would be a good talking point for them, the instructor, to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. So maybe use shifting value, maybe use different texture to provide some more visual interest for your viewer, because all of these are looking very similar. Do you see how that could maybe work?
Are you asking me, or are you telling me that you're asking them?
Well, all of a sudden I got pretty in depth there, and I hope the point was made. But it's the highly tailored advice, easel side, depending on the temperament of the student, depending on their skill set, depending on the lesson for the day, that really brings it full circle. And, of course, practice always has a role in that as well. But
maybe a little.
that's what
Maybe a
happened
little.
for me at the workshop. Just like moment after moment, it was like, wow. So yeah.
So I'm going to
it
ask
really
you. I'm going to ask you one of
stretched
those.
my brain.
Ask you one of those tough questions.
Okay.
It's kind of like, when did you stop beating your wife? There's no right or wrong answer. You can't win either way.
Oh boy.
Yeah. How did you get so good so fast?
Well, I think that it's the mental shift of just like we were talking about with the quick draw, like we were talking about with, in a particularly a to the point easel side critique from somebody you really admire, or even painting by somebody's side who's either your child out painting you or a master artist out painting you, is just this idea of, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm just going to get better. I'm going to try not to be afraid of a failed painting, because the failed paintings are currently happening in my studio, and failed paintings have happened. And I used to be afraid of that. And I think I'm just not as afraid of it anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe there's that.
So let's take that, because everybody wants to get better, right? At least I hope everybody wants to get better. So what are...
aspire to get worse.
What would you say? I'm going to ask you a two-part question. I'll
Okay.
ask you part one and part two. Number one is, what are the best first moves for a relatively beginner new plein air painter? And then take it to the higher level. How do you challenge veterans and get them to a high level? Because one of the things that I think is interesting is, in getting to know you, I realized that you had that moment when you were doing a lot of painting. You had been, but you had that moment when you transformed yourself from a good painter to a great painter. And sometimes that doesn't happen for any of us. And yet you managed to pull that off. And it seemed to me like it was very deliberate. And so I'd like to know what your advice is for the newbies and for the old bees.
Oh, well, I think that's a good question. And, well, first of all, I will say I still feel like I'm learning. So there is that for sure. But new plein air painters, plein air painting is such a wonderful way to start looking at the color relationships that are out there. There's so many people that just use the crutch of photography. And yes, I'm going to use that word. That's a strong word and might not be popular. I have people that come to my class, or maybe I see them at an exhibit or something like that, and they say, but I'm a studio painter. I paint from photos. And the problem with photos is that they don't teach you to see colors properly. And that just means the value relationships that are happening, the human eye can see into the shadows. So the very first thing that I try to have, newcomers to the plein air, even if they've been painting for a while in the studio, I just say, well, let's look at the color relationships that are happening, because a lot of times people painting outdoors, they look from left to right, they look up and down, and they say, my God, there's so much to paint out here. How do I even start? And, the viewfinders come out and people simplify with their phone. I've even seen people take a picture on their phone and have it next to them as they paint at their easel. And I get it. We need to simplify somehow. It's good to block out some of the stimulus, but just color chip to color chip, like what is the shade of the sky? Is it soft gray? Is it warm gray? How does that relate to the ridge line of your trees? Which is lighter, which is darker? Let's relate those two colors together. Just starting out with that simple move, regardless of shape, regardless of drawing something in perspective, such as a stream bed. And then you can just piggyback your colors. I got the color of the sky. There's the color and value shades of the far trees, and maybe they're just blobs of color. Alternatively, what you could do is you could say, I did those color chips, I did those color blobs that Christine told me about, and then maybe only focus on shape. But I do think that shape can happen to some degree from photos. So when people are trying to transition from photos, or they're just beginners and, they say, Christine, can you help me? I don't know how to draw. I'm a total beginner. Is there any hope for me at all? I say, well, of course, welcome to class. And I might just have them working on some simple bars of color without the stress of having to make an interesting shape out of it. Because then and you see what is happening there, Eric, is that then there's no fear of failure because you're not making, quote unquote, a painting. You're studying nature and you're understanding about color relationships. And so that's a good way for beginners to get going. And then for advanced artists, regardless of where you're at on the scale, like I said, we're all learning. And maybe you've taken, half a dozen workshops. Maybe you've taken a lot of workshops and you're getting like some conflicting advice or something like that. Sometimes people come to me and they'll say, well, I feel like I need to work on a style. I've taken so many workshops. And a really good thing and this is just something I've been working on recently. I've been studying a lot of the old masters, Loomis's book on creative illustration. Of course, there's Edgar Payne. There's all types of artists that were working, not so long ago. And Eric, their skill set is just mind-boggling. Some of them could create a painting just from memory of a figure. They might hire a model, but their knowledge of the human anatomy was just fantastic. And there's Edgar Payne. I'm sure he could close his eyes and paint a mountain. I mean, it's just wonderful. So I've been trying to work on training my memory to observe and retain information for longer, because I realized at a certain point that I've been painting PleinAir for so long. How many sunsets have I seen? How many rocks? How many trees? Could I do a painting of that from memory? Could I dream up a scene? Could I come up with a dynamic composition? So all of a sudden, there's all types of ways you can test your memory. On a drive home, look at that interesting cloud shape. Could I make a dynamic design from that? Let's think about that dinner I had with the family, and the far hillside was bathed in this gold glow. Only lasts for a few minutes, and you don't want to be rude and leave the family at dinner and say, by the way, I'm painting now.
Right.
So could you harness that 5 minutes?
Well, Da Vinci talked a lot about that, about memory training.
Yeah. And so, that's a real trip to try to do that. You find out real fast what you might need to work on, let me tell you.
So you think that's a good way to challenge people who've been painting for a long time?
Yeah, I think that is just a great way, because what happens is you're turning PleinAir painting is short-term memory. Oh, look at the white cloud. And then you put it down, and then it leaves your brain. So if you train yourself to look at the sky, try to retain it in your head, then you are starting to transfer that knowledge and put it into long-term memory. So it will always be there for you. And then there's a really happy marriage of course, nature always has the ultimate answer, doesn't she? She has the infinite color combinations, unlimited shapes, dynamic design. And so that combined with some of your long-term memory of your base of knowledge, then you can be inspired by nature, but also draw a little bit from your base knowledge. And I think that's a good way to move forward.
How does that play into your concept of hard vision and soft vision? And maybe you could explain that.
Oh, yes. Well, a while ago, it's a long time ago before kids, I took horseback riding, and I was very, I never really got all that good, but I enjoyed it. And it was very interesting. I was reading this book and the instructor was talking about something, and I realized it was the same thing that they were describing, which is the idea, and it's going to sound a little bit like, I don't, new age maybe isn't the right term, but you know, a little bit like
little woo woo.
Yeah, a little touchy feely, like be one with the animal, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So the idea is, if you are very present in the moment and you are, the good way to do writing, I should start with, is that you feel relaxed, which of course is very hard to do because you might fall off the animal, right? So you're supposed to be relaxed. You're supposed to be engaged in the sensations of the moving animal, and you're supposed to, with soft, they call it soft vision versus hard vision, because soft vision is encompassing everything around you plus some of the sensations that you're feeling, such as the muscle movement of the animal. And the premise is that the animal will respond to you better as you have this more relaxed mental state. And the opposite of that is hard vision, where, you know, your body might be tense. You're looking at one direct focal point in front of you. And it's not that you're looking widely around or not looking widely around. I mean, you're focused on where you're going to go, obviously. But this idea really translates to art. And when I was taking horseback riding, I could really feel the difference when I put my mind to it. And I think that it does make a difference in accepting and taking in the stimulus that you see and being more present in the moment. Because in art, if somebody, let's say somebody's focusing on a tree trunk and we're outside and it's really beautiful, and they're looking more and more at that tree trunk, it actually gets darker and darker against the sky as they focus on only that one area. And gosh darn, they're trying to mix the color of the sky. And gosh darn, the tree trunk needs to be dark, and it needs to be really dark. And I don't know if you've experienced that, but I've actually experienced that, where I try to focus on one area so much that I lose sight of the rest of the painting.
Yep.
And then I step back and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, what did I just do? Like I undermined the painting because I was hyper focused on this one area. And I think when that happens, it's hard to untangle like where that badness started, you know. So I think about my horseback riding days. With that, they're in the past for sure. Now I'd be really afraid to fall off. I'm sure I'd be a mess on horseback. Right?
Well, you could paint. You could paint
anyway.
On horseback.
Well, I'm going west to Telluride this year, and I told myself I'm going to try horseback riding, and maybe I'll do a sketch on horseback. Who knows?
So one of the things I wanted to talk to you a little bit about before we wrap up is finding your style or your voice. I think you seem to be pretty good at helping people do that, and it's a question I get a lot.
Yeah, I think it's something people are very curious about. And I think especially intermediate painters, that they want to get better, and maybe they've had a critique where, you know, unfortunately it said, well, I mean, I've actually had that during judges' talks. A judge said to me once, and this was, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, but it still sticks in my mind. He looked at my work, you know, and he's like, yeah, well, it's too bad you weren't living 100 years ago. You'd be really famous now. And I really made me upset, because it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, I think of painting as kind of like handwriting, and nobody has dibs on unique handwriting. We all have our unique way of making marks on a piece of paper. I mean, there's studies that are done on handwriting. Like, we're all different, and it's okay.
But handwriting 100 years ago was a whole lot different. Very scrolly, very. So I'm not defending the judge.
Yeah.
I'm
I
just
know, but I think of that when somebody says, "What about your style?" Because I think here's the thing. I think if you paint and you are really true to yourself and you develop your critical eye and you keep educating yourself, keep almost reinventing yourself, like you were talking about before.
right.
What you liked at one point, maybe you don't like anymore. I mean, that's okay too. It's all part of you. And so don't try to emulate others. Definitely learn from others, but always go back to, well, what do I think about that? And I think then your style just evolves.
Yeah.
And it just happens. Because otherwise, what else do we have? If I don't want to chase gimmicky stuff. I want to do a painting until it feels right. And sometimes that's really hard to do. Sometimes they don't feel right
You're
for a
not
long time.
so you're not focusing on creating a style and making sure you get, whatever that type of brush stroke is. You're just doing what you naturally do, and it kind of evolves, is what you're saying.
Well, and it's, I don't mean to shortchange the question because I think it's a really good one, but I think it's pretty much as simple as that. And sometimes, maybe that's not a popular answer because people might say, well, I have been painting for a while. And it's, like you were saying before, how do you push yourself? How do you get better? I mean, to be ruthless with your own work, to have the idea of, I worked for 10 years. Here's my stack of stuff. Okay, well, what's your favorite painting?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah.
I mean, most people, when you say, let's examine that pile of stuff that you did, and maybe they say, oh, I don't have a favorite painting. And it's like, okay, well, in that stack of those paintings, which ones have pieces that you like?
Yeah.
And then that is part of your style emerging right there. That's what it is.
So
I would say.
Last question is relates to how you work. You are, I was going to say unusual, but that probably would be a little bit strong. But you
could say that.
You use watercolors and oils, and you use watercolor to inform your oils. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I think that's been great for me. I just feel like I'm a very dotty painter. I have these little chips of color. I didn't really know that about myself until I had some good friends kind of point that out. And I've been lucky enough to, over the years, paint with people, see them start a painting. I realized that other people will start with a whole area of blocking in or a flood of color or different ways. And I realized that when I start my oils, it's very similar to how I start my watercolors, with little chips of color. I might take a paper towel and merge that. And then so my oils inform my watercolors and vice versa, like you were saying. So a thing I've been working on lately is to have a watercolor study by my side, even though it might not look like anything very exciting. The way that watercolor, just one wash will overlap the other, and you get these little surprise moments that are happening. So I try to incorporate some of that into my oils. I've realized through time, through looking at my stacks of old studies, that both mediums are really important, and they're more similar than people think. So I've actually had a friend of mine I taught watercolor to because they were just really interested about this dynamic of Christine's an oil painter, but look, she does all these watercolors. They thought that was really neat. And of course, Sargent is a great example of somebody who does both so well. So anyway, that was fun to teach somebody who's been doing oil for so long watercolor. Again, it's just that idea. I mean, teaching is a big part of learning for me and painting. So it's been lots of fun. Good art journey.
This has been a complete pleasure. Oftentimes it goes through a kind of an interview format, and this has been just kind of a nice conversation. It's been very refreshing, and we could probably go on to a part 2, which maybe we'll do another time. And
Okay.
and take it even to the next level. But it's
When you come out cherry blossom painting, let's do it.
that's right. Make sure my room is ready, and I would like chocolate. I would like chocolates and coffee by my bed, please, and
Okay.
and maybe some ladyfingers. Yes, ladyfingers.
Oh.
And little sandwiches, and I require that the crust be cut off.
An
Let's see.
easygoing house guest, my
Yes.
favorite.
Yes, that's right. And like all house guests, I'll smell after 2 days. It's like fish. So anyway, this has been a pleasure. It's been great getting to know you. You were out here in Austin shooting a couple videos, which are coming out soon. And obviously, you're going to be teaching at the PleinAir convention. And so I'm really thrilled that I've gotten to know you a little bit more. You are a very special person and a rock star painter. And I think that it's going to be really fascinating to see your career soar. It's already soaring, but I think it's going to soar a lot more. So thank you so much for being on the PleinAir podcast, Christine.
Well, you're so kind, and thanks so much for having me. And I hope that some of my, working out of these details and helping students has helped somebody today listening. So I look forward to seeing you soon at the convention, Eric. Thanks again.
You're very welcome. And anybody who wants to check out Christine's website, it's Christine, CHRISTINE, Lashley, LASHLEY.com. Christine, thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric. It's my pleasure.
Well, sometimes they just go really, really well. She is so articulate, so passionate, and so in love with painting, and just easy to talk to. So that was a nice interview. Thank you, Christine Lashley. Shall we do some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your questions. And of course, you can email me questions at any time, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. That's Plein, Plein, pleinairmagazine.com. Here's a question from John. I don't know what town. He's given his last name. John Hornbuckle. He says, I'd like to know how much a beginning artist should charge for their paintings. I don't agree with this starving artist stuff. Neither do I, John. I had a man offer me a ridiculous price once, and I told him to forget it. But I do believe in being fair. Stefan Baumann said to charge a price based on square inch, which I liked, but I wanted your input. Thank you. Well, John, it's an interesting question. A square inch price, though, doesn't solve your problem. See, a square inch price is just a way to make sure that your pricing is consistent. Like if you're doing 8 by 10, then it's 8 times 10. That tells you how many square inches it is, and then you put a price on that. But if it's a 12 by 15, and you're trying to figure out the price, well, it's just 12 times 15. That's the number of square inches. You put a price on that. But if you're charging $10 a square inch or 10 cents a square inch, you still have a price issue you've got to solve. So square inch is an easy thing to calculate. I don't necessarily do it that way. And the reason I don't is because sometimes I'll work on a painting 3 or 4 times longer than I normally would. And if it's something that's just really special, sometimes I'll put a higher price on it. I know that doesn't always work for some galleries. My gallery loves it because they like the higher my price, the better for them, right? Anyway, here's the catch. The man offered you money, and he thought it was worth that amount of money to him. And of course, if you've got somebody who's not necessarily well educated about prices, they might offer you $10 for your painting, and you think it's worth $1,000, so you got a big gap. But anytime somebody's offering you money for your painting, that means they would like to own it. And typically, people might want to lowball you, and so you might be able to come to terms. Don't be offended if somebody offers you a low price. It's what it's worth to them. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And so keep in mind that anytime there's a dialogue, capture that dialogue. Say, listen, I typically sell my paintings more for $10, but can we come to the middle somewhere? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the idea is that he's offering you, and that's a good thing. Now, the thing that you have to understand is that pricing is difficult. It's never easy. And you may think that you should get a high price. I mean, what if I just said, I started painting, I love my paintings are worth $100,000. You'd say I'm nuts. Well, but there are painters who have done that and managed to get their price. I can think of one, I won't mention a name, and gets it every time because of the quality of the painting. But what you want to do is edge yourself up. The idea is get used to selling paintings. If you're new at this, hold a little show, maybe in a restaurant or something, and ask yourself what's a reasonable price that people would be able to pay, and try that. You start out with a little bit lower. You never start out typically high, and you edge your way up over time. And over time, it's about, are you becoming more collectible? Do you have a collector base? Do you have a gallery? Are you getting a lot of notoriety and publicity? Are you getting invited to be on the stage at the PleinAir convention? Things like that matter and build your career. And of course, your branding. Your branding is extremely important because branding elevates price. Always does, always does. So anyway, it's a little bit of a difficult problem to tell you what you should be doing. Now, Seiko Corporation, I've read, I don't know this for fact, but I've read that Seiko Corporation starts out by offering a higher price, and if something doesn't sell in the store, then they lower it, and they keep lowering it a little bit until they get to a price where everything is selling, and then that sets their price. That's allowing the consumers to set price. But this is not exactly a consumer scenario. I mean, you are talking to consumers, but you're talking to them in an art gallery environment or maybe a direct show. So anyway, I can't give you an exact answer, but I would say probably start out a little lower and then get some sales in that area. Once you've proven yourself, then move it up. I like artists to raise their prices once a year because there's inflation, and so your money is worth less money. Anyway, I hope that helped. The next question is from Sam in Pebble Beach, California. Always wanted to live there. What a beautiful area. Says, Eric, I've got a question. I'm not sure anybody can answer, but I've been asked to do a mural on the side of a building, and they want me to do a giant seascape like my gallery paintings. But they only want to pay me $2,000 to do it, and I get at least that for my small paintings. But it would be kind of cool. It's a busy part of town. Might be good for my career. What do you think I should do? Well, I can't tell you what to do, Sam. I can answer this for you, though. You got to consider everything. A mural that big is probably going to take you a couple of months or longer to complete, especially if you want to do it well. It's going to require you to research what kind of materials to use because what you're painting with now isn't what you're going to be painting with on the side of a building. I don't know if that's fresco techniques or house paint or what it is, but then you got to kind of learn to paint with that. It's going to take some time. Materials are going to be different than what you're used to because you want materials that are going to hold up and look good for the next 20 or 30 years or longer, and so that's going to take some time. And then the cost of materials for that amount of square footage is going to be amplified considerably. Maybe they're going to pay your cost of materials. I don't know. But the other thing you got to keep in mind is there's wear and tear on your body, on your arms, on your shoulders. It's going to disrupt your life in other ways because you're going to be so tired, you're not going to want to paint anything else. And so what's the value of this? The wear and tear to disrupt your life in other ways. At the end of the day, will you get noticed? Is this going to buy you anything? Is it going to get you publicity? And I think that's a question you always ask yourself is, what's in it for me? What's in it for my career? Is this a good business move for my career? And if it is, consider doing it. If not, don't do it. Most murals, there's so many murals on buildings now that a lot of them don't even get noticed. You just kind of drive by. You don't ever know who the artist is. One of the few exceptions to that is Wayland, who's been famous from doing these giant murals, built his career on these ideas of murals. And I'm sure he makes sure his signature is big in a noticeable spot, not necessarily the bottom corner. And I'd talk to him, find out what materials. He's a nice guy. I've met him. Find out materials he uses and how he does it. And chances are, if he's smart, he's probably got somebody else doing it for him. He probably comes up with the design and then maybe he goes in, has them, they do underpainting, maybe he goes in and does touch-up, maybe he doesn't even do that. Because when you're blowing something up that large, things get very posterized when you get up close, and so that's a whole different animal you got to learn. Anyway, it's worth talking to somebody and researching it and thinking about, is it worth several weeks? The other thing I would do is whoever is sponsoring this, whether it's a city or otherwise, I'd want to know, what's the publicity plan? Are you going to get my picture in the local newspaper? You're going to get me on TV? You're going to get me on the a local internet stuff? How are they going to bring attention to you? What are the other benefits? Is there going to be like a grand opening, a party where you can invite a bunch of VIP guests, where you can get business cards and spread your name and talk about your work? Is there going to be a show of your artwork in conjunction? Think about all those aspects, because for the amount of time and the effort, it needs to be worth doing. Anyway, that's the Marketing Minute. Hope it helped. Well, I want you all to get a lot of rest, because we've got long days at the PleinAir convention. We start with Art Marketing Boot Camp at 6:30 in the morning, and we do that. And then we have homeroom. Then we have sessions all day. We break for meals, but we have evening sessions, and some people are even going nocturne painting. And then, of course, you're going to end up sitting around in the bar or chatting with people, maybe playing some music, hanging out till late at night. And so get your rest. You're going to need it. We'll see you at the PleinAir convention. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do about Sunday coffee, because we're painting on Sunday morning in wine country. Got to get up pretty early to catch the bus or to drive there. But anyway, if you've not seen my blog where I do this thing called Sunday Coffee, it's every week, and I'm always writing about something fun, sometimes fun. Anyway, check it out. Sunday Coffee can be subscribed to by going to coffeewitheric.com. Always fun to do this. Let's do it again sometime, hopefully like next week, God willing. We'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.